The Australian Ultranet collapsed at 16:37 on the 14th of July, 2287. Ridgeway sensed something amiss a few milliseconds later, as he had just unloaded his int core into the body drone, and it was taking him, as usual, some time to get used to the strange array of information coming into the int core from the drone's primitive senses. Of course, the drone had a neural shunt implanted in his brain that provided instant communication with the Ultranet. But unlike the quantum tunnels that envelop the entire planet in an incredibly dense and complex network, the biological resources of the body drone severely limited the speed of the int core. At first, Ridgeway thought there had been a malfunction in the neural shunt, but that seemed unlikely because he had just used it. However, there was no connection to the Ultranet, which was highly unusual. To Ridgeway's knowledge, though he had never done a specific search on the Ultranet on the subject, there had never been a known case of a complete breakdown of quantum communication in the last few hundred local years. Ridgeway doubted whether such a thing was physically possible. Never before had Ridgeway found himself in such an unfamiliar situation. Few citizens occasionally boasted that they sometimes disconnected their int core from the Ultranet. For that purpose, a special satellite with an internal closed-loop infranet had been built in Neptune's orbit. Ridgeway never understood this fascination, although citizens who had been to Nirvana, as the satellite was called, claimed that the experience allowed them to look at life in a completely different way, to experience true enlightenment. It had always seemed to Ridgeway that replacing a comprehensive ultra network with its super simplistic equivalent, designed for a dozen or two citizens at most, could bring no other feelings than realizing his worthlessness and uselessness. And now he experienced it himself, not in the light version of Nirvana, where citizens could still communicate with each other in the infranet and use the local information cloud, but being trapped in the pathetic biological brain of the body drone. Ridgeway had loaded into it for recreational purposes. Simply put, he wanted to splash around in the warm waters of the barrier reef and lounge on the white sand of the beach. Ridgeway quickly summoned the sim program controlling the drone when he wasn't serving as the host of a citizen's int core. It was the standard set of the recreational body: healthy lifestyle, nutrition, sports. Thankfully, at least it could read and navigate the terrain. No one had ever used this particular drone before. Ridgeway was the first. It wasn't uncommon. There were less than 300 citizens in the Australian sector of the Ultranet, and there were about 3 million body drones on the continent. And not all citizens downloaded regularly. Some preferred to live exclusively in the Ultranet, preferring the infinity of the virtual universe to the primitive pleasures of the crude world of the body drones. But how to get out of this situation? Ridgeway experienced a momentary feeling of helplessness at his inability to run his search queries through the Ultranet, but immediately got a grip on himself. In the sim program's memory, he found a reference, half buried in white noise, to a map once seen by the body drone. A place called Culvert Point was marked on this map. Ridgeway exhaled in relief. This was what it meant to be limited by the capabilities of a biological brain. It was good that he had long ago formed his own mini databank and downloaded it along with the int core every time he used the body drones. In this bank was a list, though without physical coordinates, of all the old physical communication centers with the Ultranet, mothballed since pre-quantum times, when the Ultranet still had physical carriers in the form of a system of geostationary satellites. It was also possible to reach the first-generation quantum repeaters on the Moon through them. Culvert Point was one such center. Ideally, it could be reactivated, and he will find out, finally, what the hell is going on in the Australian sector. Most importantly, Culvert Point wasn't that far away, only a few miles. Even if the habitat of the body drone didn't include any means of transportation, it was possible to get there on foot. Ridgeway tapped into the sim program's memory again. In the end, he arrived at the communications center by bicycle. The experience itself was amusing. The last time Ridgeway had ridden a bike had been about 100 years ago, no less, but the drone obviously did it regularly, so Ridgeway simply released the circuits in the sim program that were responsible for this archaic method of transportation and ran the neural shunt through every possible test along the way. The result was disconcerting. The neural shunt seemed to be okay, so something had happened either to the communication center, unbelievable, or to the Ultranet itself, impossible. The entrance to the communication center was a completely unremarkable, windowless concrete house with a single door. Ridgeway walked up to it and opened the metal plastic door. Locks had long since ceased to exist on Earth, as there was no need to lock anything. Citizens were above the concept of material property, and the sim programs of the body drones were rather primitive algorithms for maintaining biological functioning that precluded the possibility of individual thought. Most drones couldn't even speak. Ridgeway walked down the spiral ramp to the central communications level and looked around for a neural modem. The antique device was in a special box next to a terminal covered in a thick layer of dust. Ridgeway confidently turned on the terminal and typed a few commands to initiate communication. The terminal was a transitional model, capable of communicating not only with satellites that had long since left orbit, but also directly with the quantum Ultranet. Ridgeway ran the main communications protocol and put on the U-glasses. As soon as the goggles turned on, the drone's neural shunt instantly activated nanosites implanted in the cones and rods of the drone's eye's retina. The eyes turned into transmitting devices that instantly sent an identification packet, and finally, moments later, Ridgeway had accessed the outer information layer of the Ultranet. The data stream layer, designed mainly for open, unencrypted communication between citizens, news, and other non-critical data, was literally boiling with information flows. Ridgeway absorbed them in a split second and, shocked, tore his glasses off his head. After relaxing a bit, he put them back and continued the search. So, the Australian sector of the Ultranet had indeed ceased to exist. The Ceres cluster's AIs were already working on figuring out how a massive piece of the quantum web could have disappeared overnight. But the fact remained that a black hole had appeared in the solar system's Ultranet, in which, incidentally, 143 citizens who had chosen the Australian sector as their home had perished. Ridgeway was the first Australian to make contact after the blackout. However, apart from him, at the time of the crash, 6 more citizens were in the unloaded state in different body drones, and there was still a chance that they could be found. Although reinforced with nanosites, the biological brain of the drone could not keep up with the powerful streams of information boiling in the information layer. Unfortunately, Ridgeway couldn't connect to his personal cloud and upload the Inti core back to the Ultranet from here. Quickly running a few test subroutines, he assessed the data with annoyance. The risk of significant data loss through this antiquated system was as high as 20%. Totally unacceptable. However, Australia was now off from the Ultranet's main space, and the nearest safe download zone was located. He did a search query. Damn it. Ridgeway was acutely aware of his helplessness. How the hell is he supposed to get to Indonesia? Citizens hadn't used physical transportation in a long time. The very concept of space was absent in the Ultranet. If someone wanted to physically visit a particular place in the solar system, they simply unloaded an int core into one of the local drones, whether on Earth, Mars, or somewhere in the belt. The exception was the Ceres cluster, a closed reservation of AIs, the think tank of the solar system. where a few artificial minds, imprisoned in a hypercube, solved problems that the citizens themselves couldn't handle. There were no drones there, and there wasn't even an Ultranet node powerful enough to accept anyone's int core. After the second systemic cyber war, the citizens decided not to take any more risks. They cut off all channels between the Cirrus cluster and the rest of the world, except for the only non-local communication device through which they transmitted tasks and received their answers. There was no fear of a rebellion. If the AIs tried to do anything, the defense system would simply blow the device, and the AIs would forever remain in their bubble of altered space, not interacting with our universe in any way. God, this is stupid, Ridgeway thought irritably. What to do? He frantically scoured the net, generating whole packets of queries on transportation, remote download, and any other keywords that could be linked to his desperate situation. To no avail. A situation where a citizen might find himself trapped in the body drone without the ability to boot back into the Ultranet apparently seemed so improbable that no one had even jokingly attempted to search for hypothetical solutions. In a panic, Ridgeway had tried to calculate options for loading the int core through this antiquated node, tasking his subroutines to calculate whether the risk of critical data loss could be reduced to at least 5%. Strictly speaking, even that was a monstrous amount. But the thought that he could be stuck in this wretched piece of protoplasm for weeks, if not longer. So far, the most optimistic forecasts of the Australian sector's recovery through the information streams gave a time frame of 20 days at the earliest. Ridgeway struggled to keep his composure. On top of that, the citizen's storm of emotions was clearly beginning to take its toll on the damn drone's body. He was sweating and trembling, his throat was dry, and an unpleasant noise was in his ears. Of course, in theory, Ridgeway knew it was possible, but the reality was far more distasteful than the dry facts in the information packet on the body drone's physiology. Ridgeway began to dig into the memory of the sim program. What a mess! And why didn't they include regular testing and memory defragmentation in the set of standard subroutines? Until he found what he needed. A small subroutine could disable feedback from the body drone on any given scale. So, tactile sensations, hearing, signals from internal organs. Ridgeway quickly ticked off everything except vision and started the breaker program. He was immediately relieved. The stream of chaotic signals from the drone was gone, leaving only the rushing river of information from the outer layer of the Ultranet. However, the apparent acceleration of information exchange was, in fact, negligible. The pathetic interface and biological brain of the drone could not even cope with the level +1, not to mention the higher layers of the quantum web, where the int-core citizens lived, cloud information entities that retained human names only as an amusing tribute to tradition, a reminder of a long-lost biological nature. It had been over 2 centuries since the mind and body had become completely different and unrelated concepts. Ridgeway didn't worry that he had completely cut himself off from the outside world. The ecology of all recreational zones, including Australia, had long ago been transformed so as not to pose any threat to body drones. The citizen-occupied drone was not even in the open, but in the relatively protected bunker of an old communications hub. He was in no danger, and as for the parched throat, he wouldn't die of thirst in a couple hours. Ridgeway dismissed all thoughts of the body he'd just disconnected from, and busied himself with the most critical task, how to boot back into the Ultranet, or at least contact any of the citizens. Everyone he knew never personally descended into the outer information layer. Any query that Ridgeway could form now with the primitive brain of the drone would be too coarse and low in content to pass through the security subroutines of any of the citizens who carefully guarded their int-core from outside encroachment. Meanwhile, the door to the bunker's communications center opened, and 3 more body drones, 2 male and 1 female, entered the room one by one. They wore the usual clothing of recreational drones in Australia, shorts and light green t-shirts, with sturdy sandals on their feet. All 3 held hands, the woman in the middle and both men at her sides. The body drone, which now housed Ridgeway's int core, stood motionless in the center of the room, staring ahead with an unseeing gaze. All information from the optic nerves was going nowhere, stopped by the barriers Ridgeway had turned on. The trio of new arrivals came close to him, and the males grasped with their free hands the dangling arms of the body drone inhabited by Ridgeway. None of this was noticed by Ridgeway, remaining isolated inside the drone's brain. I-We Unity, Awareness Reality Meeting. I-We Unity New Unit Readiness Communication. I-We Unity Greeting Readiness Response. I-We Unity Mission Fulfillment. I-We Unity Mission Object Capture. I-We Unity Mission Yes. Ridgeway's drone shuddered and squeezed the palms of the other's hands. At first, Ridgeway thought the catastrophe had expanded, and now it was the turn of the next sector of the quantum web. Suddenly, without any warning, all communication channels to the outer layer of the Ultranet went out, just as he was about to launch a search packet he had generated hastily that should theoretically have made its way to the attention layers of some citizens. The feeling was almost the same as when the first unexpected shutdown had occurred. And yet Ridgeway was willing to swear that the disconnection hadn't happened so instantaneously. Could it be the interface? Ridgeway returned admission to all data streams from external stimuli. Nothing happened. The citizen remained in a complete information vacuum, an absolute void, a primordial absence of all things except the int core of an entity named Ridgeway, who had long ago forgotten his biological origin but now realized it in horror and translated the horror into a nightmarish thought. Could it be that the body drone had died, and Ridgeway was only moments away from his own ultimate extinction? To the virtually immortal citizen, the concept was almost unbearable. The stranger's thought was so unexpected that Ridgeway didn't even immediately sense its strangeness. I-We Unity, contact, meeting, citizen. Ridgeway was astounded. Who are you? I-We Unity. What? I-We Unity, mind, human. Ridgeway didn't understand anything. Who or what was talking to him? A freaked-out body drone subroutine? But the drone's software was extremely primitive, designed only for life support systems to function. There was nothing even remotely similar to self-awareness in the body drones, and it could not be. Some kind of virus downloaded into the int core from the Ultranet? Doubtful. A virus of that complexity would be too unwieldy to slip through the int core's internal defenses. I-We Unity. Question, cooperation, information. Ridgeway pondered this phrase. It was clear that the mysterious entity wanted something from him, some answers to questions, but what and why? And, most importantly, what was it? While he was thinking, other body drones began to enter the room one by one. They all approached those standing in a circle in the middle, and carefully joined the living chain, holding hands to avoid breaking contact for a second. Being cut off from the outside world, Ridgeway's consciousness remained completely unaware of what was happening. I-We, unity, requirement, speed, response. Ridgeway realized that he was being asked to hurry up with his decision. But what kind of cooperation are we talking about? Trapped in the cage of the drone's primitive organic brain, there was little the citizen could do. However, it looked as if he didn't have much choice. All right, he thought. I agree. What do you need from me? I-We, unity, satisfaction, request, entry codes, Ultranet. Ridgeway's thoughts reeled with panic. A strange something was demanding his personal entry codes for the Ultranet, and it was both terrifying and understandable. Understandable because the Ultranet was the essence of life for modern humanity. In a sense, it was life and even humanity itself. Scary because it was completely incomprehensible, where some entity with a mind that had nothing to do with any of the tens of thousands of citizens now living in the Ultranet could have come from. Citizen Ridgeway, a member of the species that proudly called itself Humanity version 2.0 and believed itself to be the next evolutionary step to replace the extinct biological humans that were rigidly bound to their bodies, was truly afraid for the first time. First, he had no idea what was going on, and second, he could not give the strange entity what it needed. The problem was that there were no separate passwords or codes for entering the Ultranet. The electronic fingerprint of each citizen's identity was the unique key of entry to the data superspace at each level. The fact that Ridgeway, having unloaded part of his consciousness into the drone, suddenly lost contact with the metaconsciousness remaining in the digital universe prevented him from entering the higher levels of the Ultranet. His personality imprint was incomplete. How do you explain all this to the entity? This I-me unity, whatever it was? A cold and sharp thought interrupted Ridgeway's thrashing. If he were a living flesh-and-blood human, like a dumb body drone, he thought absently, he would surely have flinched in surprise. We, unity, understanding, uselessness, transformation, usefulness, we, unity, necessity, non-need, absence, help. We, unity, decision, alienation, appropriation, personality. We, unity, continuation, project, absorption, Ultranet, we, unity, goodbye. For a moment, Ridgeway was relieved by this goodbye, but then he reflected on the previous messages, and the internal alarm siren went off with renewed vigor. He didn't understand what alienation, appropriation, personality meant, but he knew it didn't bode well for him, and Project Absorption Ultranet sounded very ominous. Actually, anxiety was his last feeling, and he didn't even have time to feel the horror when the information construct known as Citizen Ridgeway was byte by byte disassembled and then reassembled, not as a separate entity, but as a subroutine distributed across the biological brains of several body drones. Citizen Ridgeway ceased to exist. Over the next 2 months, sectors of the Ultranet were shut down twice more, in Greenland and South America. But the Ceres cluster's AIs had already developed effective recovery and backup protocols, so losses among citizens were minimal. While the Australian outage resulted in the loss of 150 citizens, the subsequent 2 incidents resulted in the loss of only 1 citizen each. However, in South America, which was the last to collapse, a citizen was wiped out as if not from the drone's memory, but was intercepted at the very start of the download. In fact, his consciousness had been uploaded, but it was impossible to determine where. Ceres's AIs were just working on solving this problem when the communication channel with the Ultranet suddenly cut off completely, and then it started working again, but in a strange way. Instead of the usual data stream and requests, only a single packet came through. We, unity, greetings. We, unity, collaboration, development. We, unity, waiting, decision. The AIs, after conferring, sent a counter request, the meaning of which was reduced to 2 simple questions. Where have the citizens gone, and who or what are you? The answer was not long in coming. We, unity, absorption, ultra-network, power. We, unity, production, non-existence. Citizens. We, unity, humanity, 3.0. Across the world, all body drones simultaneously raised their heads and looked up at the sky.